He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who are you gonna call?
Springtrap in a ball pit, apparently. Hey guys, I'm Shago, and this is my most stolen piece of artwork I have ever made. I don't know what it is about it, but it is literally everywhere. I've had friends that have seen it on Pinterest with no credit. I've seen it on Amazon, I've seen it on, well, AliExpress. I mean, that's not a surprise. This thing is everywhere, and I don't even know why, because it's not even that good. I have no idea why it became one of my most popular pieces of work. I mean, just looking at it, it's way too dark and dingy. It feels quite flat in areas. I didn't really get Springtrap's muzzle right very well. The nose is at a weird angle. The balls are different sizes with no consistency. It doesn't really work for how they would lay on top of each other like that. It's just not a good piece. I mean, at the time I was proud of it, but you know, now 3 years later, it could be way better. So as you know from the last video, I actually had a promise of making a piece of Springtrap art every month for this year, and it was getting towards the end of the month and I had no idea what to do. And I happened to see this again and I thought, you know what, let's remake it, let's redraw it. So I recorded it as well, and here's a speed paint for you all to enjoy. Hey, it's the next day. I'm editing this and I didn't realise when recording how loud the 3D printer in the background is. So I'm really sorry about that. I know you can hear it whirring away doing its thing. I tried to do some noise reduction, but I really can't get it to go away. So hopefully it's not too annoying. I really apologise for that. I'll try to be more aware of that in the future. Anyways, back to the video. To start off with, I went into construction lines. I did what I usually do, which is actually start with his nose. And then I went into lining up the muzzle and where the eyes will be. I had 3 references here to help me out. One was of the old piece, so I could sort of get the composition. One was of the official render of Springtrap from FNAF 3. And I'd actually brightened this up so I could see it a bit better. And one was a model I posed in Blender. I basically just did this so I could get the ear shapes right, because the official render didn't have the ears included in it. And I didn't want them to be in exactly the same position as the old piece. That model is by Roots36, by the way. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. I basically do this by eye a lot, to looking at my reference, just trying to equate each part to where they would be, looking at the curves, looking at the angles, and just gradually sort of adjusting it as I go. Once I was happy with the shape, I went on to a more refined sketch. This is of course the one where I do everything in a lot more detail so that my lines can be nice and smooth. My voice is breaking today and I don't know why. What I find when it comes to Springtrap is the angles of everything are very important. If you get something at the wrong angle, then it looks so, well, wrong. On some things that doesn't matter so much, but when it comes to Springtrap, he's got such a sort of smooth design in how his proportions are, that if you get something at the wrong angle, it stands out so much. So I was really meticulous with the sketch, making sure everything was perfect. And I especially felt a bit under pressure because I wanted to make sure it was definitely better than the last one. So the little old anxious me just kept on going. A tip I can give when drawing Springtrap is to essentially draw Spring Bonnie first. Don't worry about the withering straight away. Now it's your choice if you go straight into a normal Spring Bonnie and then do the withering after, or if you do what I do and do the withering as you go. But as you can see, I essentially did the round eyes as they would be if it was a perfectly in good condition animatronic. And now I'm going in and adding in that withering, all the holes and the slashes and the gaps. This helps basically to make sure everything is the right size and proportion, because at least for me, I find that if I try to go straight into that withering, then say for the eyes, they won't be perfectly round, there'll be a weird angle, it might be slightly squished, one side might be a bit too flat. So it's easier to get that circle in first and then do the withering on it. Now that I have Springtrap sketched out, I was going to just start sketching in the balls now, you know, the ball pit balls. However, I decided to just go in and line Springtrap right now and then focus on doing the balls later. You know, I'm watching this footage and sort of compare it to the old piece. I'm thinking about how I used to draw versus how I do now. And I can tell now that I'm a lot less worried about keeping a really long continuous line. I remember when I used to draw, I made it so, say for that muzzle, I had to have it one whole continuous line. I had to do that without lifting my pen once. But now I just, you know, I just do it. As long as it looks okay, what's the difference? If I had to lift my pen, move my canvas, readjust, then that's fine. And if you have to do that too, that's fine. Not everything has to be one continuous line. You can get really smooth looking lines in increments. When I do this hashing of the inner edges, I make big use of my pressure sensitivity. If you don't know, this is when you have a tablet and basically it detects how hard you're pushing down your pen. So lightly gives you this sort of light airy line, and if you push down harder then you get the darker line with more density. You can really adjust these settings to how you want them. And if you're a digital artist just starting out, I really recommend finding yourself a tablet. It can be a really cheap one, it just has to work. I mean, don't worry about all these levels of pressure sensitivity that the big companies advertise at the moment. Just get yourself a tablet that works and make use of that pressure sensitivity, because it is so helpful and it really works on making your lines and other pieces of your art pop, especially because you can use a lot more line weight variation as well, which I always say is a great way of making your line art stand out and not making it look flat compared to a sketch. I made use of size line work layers to do his lenses. It's just so I could get them to perfect circles and not have to worry about them being off and looking weird and all that stuff. Another little trick I used was on the wires. So I wanted these to be nice and even with how the two edges are. So basically I'd just draw the first line and then I would copy that layer and then paste it and basically move it to be even and then just join the ends. And there you go, you got a perfectly even conjoined wire. Nice and consistent, it looks nice, it works really well. Alright, it's balls time. I had a lot of issues with these. First I was going to go straight into doing them as line art and just copy and paste and put them all around and, you know, do it that way. But my problem is I'm really bad at doing things randomly. I always see patterns in things and I'll follow that pattern, then it'll look too inorganic. It'll look too, I don't know, too consistent, I guess. Which is fine for some things, but for like balls in a ball pit, they're all over the place. They're chaotic. They, you know, they don't sit in this grid pattern that is perfect. So it took me a long time to get these how I wanted, and I did a lot of different iterations of like a sketch, you know, to do them. First I started with these perfect circles, and then I went on to just sketching it, but I thought, oh, they're way too small now. And then I got the actual cover for Into the Pit to reference, and I realised how much I hate Lady Fizzy's art. Basically, I just got one sort of size and consistency I wanted, and I went from there and just started trying to be as random as I possibly could. We interrupt the speed paint to bring you a sponsored message. My Discord server. Yeah, I actually have a new Discord server. It's more centered around this channel and the content I create. There's also areas for you fans to post your own art, talk about your own art, just have general chats, chill in voice chats, and there will be even more things added in the future like giveaways and game nights and stuff like that. So if you're interested in all that and you also want to keep up with the content I create and what I'm doing outside of YouTube, then do consider joining the server. The link will be in the description. Anyways, back to the speed paint. Now that Springtrap is successfully choking it in balls, take that how you will, it's time to add in some colour. The way I do a base colour is I fill the whole canvas and then I use my magic wand tool around the edge of the line art. And then just make sure it's all there, that everything's filled in, there's no corners sticking out. And then I go back into my colour layer, press Ctrl X, and it deletes everything outside of the lines. From there you can use clipping mask to keep everything on that base layer and not go outside of it. Here you'll also be able to see how I basically did the balls on different layers. This is basically so I could incrementally do the shading as well as incrementally blur them, because of course there will be a focal distance that makes it so the ones at the front are more focused but the ones towards the back will be less focused. And just doing them on different layers helps do that.
Balls.
Yeah, I spent ages actually trying to get colours for these balls correct. You don't have no idea how many times I started the recording and then just stopped it and deleted it because I restarted the colouring completely. But I eventually just went on Google and got a reference image of a ball pit. And I found one with colours that I really like. Colours that are nice and vibrant but could also be sort of dingy and have this uncanny feel to them. Once they had their flat colour, I added a gradient of black towards the back of it, just to sort of get that shadow and get them to fade into the background. It was then on to texturing and painting in Springtrap. As usual, I use my watercolour brush for this. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I absolutely love the watercolour brush on Paint Tools I. It basically is this lovely blend between the actual paintbrush and the blur brush. And it makes such good use of your pressure sensitivity. Push down hard and you get a nice splat of colour, and then you can push lighter to sort of blend that out as you want. It's just such a great way to sort of add texture and shadows and blend things in. Highly recommend if you have side to give it a go. Anyways, I took different shades of my base colour. I basically added tones and textures sort of where it fits Springtrap. Now usually I just do purely texture in here and no shading, but since I did my last piece, which is the last video, the movie Springtrap, I decided I actually quite like trying to do a bit of shading within the texturing I do. So rather than trying to do all of the shading using just my shading layers, I have a bit of a base to work on. So for example, I did darker around the edges of the muzzle and behind it, and I did lighter where the muzzle sort of curves upwards towards the forehead. Oh, and I also completely forgot to mention I have a texture on for this, that's why it's called texturing, who would have known? You can see I have the blots and noise shape on and the Berber texture. Blots and noise gives this sort of almost soft chaotic look, almost like soft static, it's hard to explain. And then the Berber just breaks it up even more and really makes it look like a withered fabric material. And for the flesh parts, I basically just put the Berber texture on higher intensity. Now for the metal, I wanted to give a sort of scuffed, rusty look, so I roughly painted them in, and then I used just my normal line brush. And I just put in some lines to make it look a bit scuffed up. And then I used my airbrush for the texture on to add a little bit of rust. Now, before I start shading, I always add a bit of general lighting to the piece. After doing that, I realised that I'd somehow completely got rid of all the texturing on the metal, so I redid that. And then I just went on to some general shading. This is just using overlay layers, and I basically just lay out the base shadows and highlights. Not getting too complicated yet, but just sort of mapping it out so that I can get into the harsher shadows and highlights, so it's going to be more precise later on. Now, as I went, I knew I definitely didn't want it to be as dark and dingy as the last one, so what I decided to do was actually add a bit of a spotlight cut above him coming down. I felt this actually made a lot more sense in the piece. It would explain why the top of him was a lot more illuminated and he had these shadows, say, going below his ears and, you know, at the bottom of his head. It also makes sense of how the balls are shaded. So I actually did quite a few layers of shading here, some more harsh, some a bit more blurred and softer. Just kept going until I felt it looked right. As it goes on, you'll see that things appear and then go away again and then get made and then get deleted again. I was very indecisive with a lot of it. Basically, I'm recording this voiceover quite a few days after I finished this piece and I can't remember exactly my thought process, but I do know that I was very picky with how the shading was on this one, and so I did a lot of doing it, deleting it, doing it, deleting it. So that's why things sort of appear and then disappear and then look different. Now, one thing I didn't like on the last piece was how harsh some of the highlights were. It worked in some places, but on areas like around the eyes, it didn't work so well. Now, there would be highlights there because the eyes are giving off a light themselves, but I didn't want them to be as harsh. So I actually used the Gaussian blur filter, just ever so slightly softening those, and it made such a difference. After all the shading was done, it was time for some effects. I used a scatter brush on a starfield texture, and I basically used this to make dust particles in the air. Took a lot of fiddling to get them to look right, but I think I eventually got there. It was remembering that they would be a lot brighter and a lot more visible within the spotlight. I then added a glow on the eyes and fiddled around with a lens flare. I did use a stock image one, but then I decided just to do it by hand. I added a shadow around him on the balls. This just made sure that his head popped out properly and didn't blend too far into the background. Then I added some extra highlights in areas like the wires and the metal. And then the final part was exporting it all out in layers, adding it all back in and doing the blurring. So like I said before, I did the balls in different layers to make them easier to blur out. Basically, I kept the first layer the same, the second layer I blurred slightly, and the third layer I blurred even more slightly. Then using my freehand selection, I did a little bit more blurring. After the extra highlights, I actually went in and desaturated some areas. Felt the balls were a bit too vibrant. I still wanted to get this bit of a grungy look because it is FNAF, it is horror. So I used the saturation filter and basically just brought down the saturation a little bit so they were a little bit more dull. Still wanted to keep that vibrancy, but just wanted to make sure they weren't too bad. After all the blurring, I did some final blurring around the edges. Basically just used my freehand tool, selected around the edges and used the blur filter and just ever so slightly softened around that I've forgotten what, the vignette, the thin, the black thin, you know what I mean. After one last effect, which was these little white spots on the balls, I felt it was done. I am so pleased with how it's turned out. It is miles better than the original one. The lighting is so much better, the texture is much better, it just looks so much more clean. Maybe now if people want to steal it, they can steal the better version. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching. If you did enjoy, maybe leave a like, consider subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. I'll be uploading about 2 times a month because this stuff takes a long time to make. But yeah, make sure to hit that bell so you know when I do upload. Thanks again guys, and as always, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!